we do not address inequality, if we do not address income inequality, both economic and racially, in this country, just by moving to the suburbs is not going to fix the problem at all. You'll just have a bunch of poor people in the suburbs.
Patterson Park, which used to be the older European ethnic neighborhood where I was born, that's now gentrifying itself, compared that to another neighborhood called Harlem Park. The name Harlem Park speaks for itself, but it was once lower middle class, clerical service industry, the railroad unionized worker that we're all familiar with. And then another neighborhood called Roland Park, which is where the doctors, lawyers, Hopkins faculty, and all live. The life expectancy, the difference between Harlem Park and Roland Park, controlling for violence, is 20 years.
Neighborhoods became more unequal at a faster rate than households. So we know that, yeah, okay, there's more inequality, so of course neighborhoods are going to look a little more unequal, but in fact, it's not just that, it's that people are sorting out even more than they were. We have Minneapolis and we have Denver, and you see, yeah, there was more inequality in neighborhoods in those two places. And the reason was there was more inequality in the households. But they didn't sort out more. Whatever they were doing in those two places, they had more inequality in households, but probably because of the national trends, the international trends, globalization, a lot of things that are not really fully under the control of mayors and local policymakers. But the stuff that they had control over, which is how do neighborhoods form, where is housing built, those kinds of things, in those two places, it seems as if they were doing something right.
So you have different tensions. In Denver, it's how do you balance the investments, the growth, and the prosperity with ensuring affordability for residents across the entire income spectrum. While in Philadelphia, the balance, the tension there is how do you look at the investments that are occurring in small areas like Center City and push that out, as the mayor had talked about, to other neighborhoods.
We can measure a lot, and we're spending a lot of time getting intoxicated by the problem that we knew we were creating. We intentionally designed it. So I don't know why we're so fascinated with it. We're exactly where we're supposed to be. And the sad part now is, you know, as I travel all around the countries, the mayors are busting their butts to try to reverse this cycle and continually run into the buzzsaw whenever they try to bring up race. It is the structural problem that really hampers their work, because it's hard to talk about race and survive. And so when I think about public policy, race-based policy got us here. And now the appetite is to say, let's not be race-focused. So I don't understand how you do that when it got you here. But even more importantly than that, I don't understand how you can talk about measurement and analytics and then not want to own a population that is vulnerable and actually hold yourself accountable for moving forward on it in a big way. And so to me, that is our challenge right now, is to say, absolutely policy got us here, and absolutely we know some things that are working, we can call them out. But if we're not going to hold the interest of entire populations, we need to stop looking at the data. We need to stop talking about evidence. We need to stop talking about measurement, because we don't actually have the appetite to measure what matters.
It's about 30% nationally of all economic segregation. It's just racial segregation. But then there's also economic segregation within the white community and within the black community that then sort of adds the remaining amount. And so to the extent that there's more economic segregation over time, it's not because racial segregation is increasing. In addition to racial segregation, which is still there and is still a huge problem, we have this additional factor of how we're building neighborhoods so that people can sort out by income. And they use two things interact, and we can't just look at one or the other. We have to look at both.
We don't want to give people health care because we're afraid that poor black and brown people are going to benefit like the rest of the world. We don't want to fix transportation like the rest of the world because we're afraid that black and brown people are going to benefit, right? We don't want to do all the things that we know all Americans will benefit from because some black and brown kids may benefit from it at the same time. When we throw race in the garbage, the country moves forward. It's just that simple to me.
Imagine if you looked at institutions and said, on an equity index, how are they performing? And how are we going to hold them accountable for not being oppressive? but for liberating folks. So as I'm listening, I'm frustrated because on one hand, I see all around the country mayors doing amazing work. And it's not at a scale statistically significant enough to move the population level needle. And that is frustrating because it's not like they're not trying. And what they need is more of us to give them the air cover, to give the elected officials the air cover they need to implement equity-focused transformative policy. And when you often discover what's the barrier to that, it is this wicked problem of folks thinking that somehow folks of color are undeserving. And in the context of policy, in a cultural context where you feel that somehow this group of others don't even deserve to exist here, I don't know how we chart a path forward.
A business in one of our vastly changing neighborhoods, a historically black neighborhood called 5 Points, a business put out a sign. The sign said, "Happily gentrifying the neighborhood since 2014. And that really brought this conversation, this difficult conversation of race and class to a fever point.
The last piece we have is something called Newark 2020, which we are telling all of the anchor institutions that they have to hire at least 2,020 Newark residents by the year 2020. We've identified at least 30 to 40 anchor institutions, and positively enough, a lot of those organizations are agreeing to move forward, from universities to the corporate sector to the med community, who are saying, listen, we understand that, because right now only 18% of the jobs that are held by Newark residents in these anchor institutions, and 60% of those 18% of those jobs are held by white Americans. So we are beginning to force them to see this, and they are partnering with us to begin to say we're going to hire Newark residents, but also invest in Newark small businesses so they can also hire people and expand at the same time. There's a lot of work to do. I know it sounds like a great thing, but we are at the bottom of that, and there's a lot of work to do along that line. And there's a lot of work to do to desegregate, these cities and these communities, and desegregate them economically first, and then desegregate them racially.
It looks like Denver is moving with the Office of Hope as one way of trying to address that. If you can talk a little bit about that. It's the Housing and Opportunity for People Everywhere office, right?
Yes, so this office was created after the city council and the mayor established a $150 million affordable housing fund. That sounds like a lot, but in a city that has a housing real estate value of $1 billion, that impact is minimal. So where are we looking for opportunities to best innovate and leverage those dollars? One of those is through a program that we had announced a couple of months ago called the Lower Income Voucher Equity Program, where we're taking $1 million of the dollars from the Affordable Housing Fund. We brought foundations and some of our bigger employers to the table and said, let's create a collective fund where we can then provide to workforce families at 40%, which is a family of four at about $34,000, up to 80% of area median income, which is a family of four at about $67,000, and buy down the cost of the rents. One of the interesting things within the growth of the rental market within Denver is that now, since the majority of that stock that was built over the last 5 years, you're talking 20,000 units, now the vacancy rate is increasing at the very high level because they overbuilt to the highest level. The 1,000 people a month coming to the city, 800 of them can't afford that, 200 of them can. So where do we buy down the cost of those rents and keep working families in Denver?
One of the most important things coming up in 2020 will be the census. If we don't take the census right, and if we don't get it right, we are cooked for a decade. Because look at where the federal funds come from. Let's go to, even if they are available, they come primarily in formulas.
Opportunity is still too random in this country, and we're better than that. We're a better nation than that. My best advice around this issue about race is to actually own the context. We don't have to beat each other up about it, but own the context. And then ask yourself, if a nation has intentionally been methodical at being results-based leaders, at oppressing folks, how long does it take to bend that curve in the other direction? See, that's the research I haven't seen.
We have so much that lies ahead that we have to really marshal our forces, but we have to start with the zip code that you're born in determines your life, and we have to have zip code action. So I believe we've got to get off the benches, into the trenches, and back on the barricades.